Good afternoon. I was very glad when Joe said, right, am I loud enough? I'm usually loud enough, I have to say. My children never ask me to speak louder, but I speak quieter. I'm very glad that when Joe said that you're a very lovely audience, because you probably need to be when you're listening to me in this sunshine. But anyway, we are here when, for the first time since 1690, the north of Ireland is the centre of European politics. And now you know why the Chinese say, may you live in uninteresting times. I have spent a lot of time, I suppose, working on the topic of intercommunity division, sectarianism, and looked at some of the issues. And I suppose what strikes me still is how complex it is to get a handle even on the whole topic, because there are no sectarians. Part of the problem is when people are asked, it's always somebody else. And the first rule of psychodynamics is try to change yourself. And if it's always about changing somebody else, the possibility of an impasse is pretty profound and marked on the card already. The second problem with the topic of sectarianism, I think, now is that this language is still tied up with religion. And as religion goes out, people say, well, I'm not sectarian then, because it's nothing to do with religion. And I have to say, I don't buy it. I think the issue is not them and us. It is what the German, actually Nazi, eventually political philosopher called friend or foe. Because sectarianism is the way in which a political history, a religious history, an economic history landed in this part of the world and created people who weren't just different, they were opponents. And once you have a world that is friend and foe, it gets quite serious when it gets armed and dangerous. And the truth is that we've lived through periods of 400 years when it's never been that far away from armed and dangerous. And so when we're talking about sectarianism, we're not just talking about something to do with a small prejudice. We're talking about something which grows from an approach that these people are somehow different and somehow suspicious, and we have to take measures against them. The bad news, I suppose, is it's still with us. And possibly even worse news is, in my view, is that friend and foe politics are growing in the world, not declining. And that the truth is that the world is becoming more like Northern Ireland than Northern Ireland is becoming like what we thought the rest of the world was. And so we now have to ask our really very big question, which is getting over the question of suspicion, which is grounded in real experience and legitimate fears, is going to become a global challenge, in which it is no longer simply about goldfish bowling on 6 counties, but it's actually about talking about what does it mean for our political systems and for people who themselves feel very, very legitimately that we have to fear the Americans or the Muslims or the Protestants or the Catholics or the British or the IRA, and how we build political systems together, because that was the project we undertook and have undertaken in Ireland, in Britain and in Northern Ireland. Because it isn't just something of a rumour, it's a deep personal experience. One of the biggest problems with this friend and foe division is that once you get friend and foe, it's okay to be suspicious. In fact, it's rational to be suspicious. I can't trust them. The difficulty with suspicion is that once you're suspicious, the whole principle of innocent till proven guilty is going out the door. Precautionary principle, guilty till proven innocent. Or not quite sure. And the problem with that is that it creates the notion of, well, I understand why they were violent. That's why we have some targets which are legitimate. We have fears which are legitimate. We have legitimate special means of the law. And all of those things have been part of our history. And I suppose what I want to say is that sectarianism, this friend and foe dynamic, is if you like, stopped by what Derville called the negative peace. But the really big challenge that we have to face is, if they talk about in the language, they don't particularly like it, the positive peace. What they mean by that is, how do you build relationships so that it is no longer friend and foe, but we have a community which is made up of, at least at the political level, friends? And if that's normal, that's the task. That is the peace process as far as I'm concerned. So when people say, is sectarianism away? Then I would put it round and say, well, is the friend and foe process over? Have we put it to bed? Are we on the track of actually getting past suspicion, where it's okay to be suspicious? And are we on the track where it's okay to start saying, actually, we can assume now that we all live in some kind of common frame? In the Northern Irish context, and I have to watch my time here, but the truth is that I think we've, for a long time, and this is why I said about United Ireland, I think this, there's been, in a sense, in the nationalist trauma, and deeply, and I understand it, and I understand why as well, the nationalist trauma of the border. The story was of an unjust border which separated Ireland into two places. I want to suggest to you that it was that, but it was also a mechanism through which Britain distanced itself from Northern Ireland through devolution, which at that time was a totally new invention. And so the consequence, thought through or not, was not just a division in Ireland, but the locking up of the part of our relationship, the British and Irish relationship, which was most difficult to separate from friend and foe. That Northern Ireland is the bit of the British-Irish relationship, almost in physical form, which locked away all of that, and which always demands that when changes happen in Britain and Ireland, they are going to happen. We are going to get pneumonia. And that, I suppose, is where we are to some degree with Brexit. So what I want to say to you is this, and this is why I think this matters also in the context of the debate about Brexit and the debate about United Ireland, which is this. It's easy to talk about Northern Ireland as a failed statelet. But I have to say that every state which doesn't deal with friend and foe will fail. So this is a challenge to those people who believe that a United Ireland is the solution. Because that United Ireland will have to take on the question of friend and foe. And when the Unionists come demanding that the national anthems changed and the flags changed, and they come saying that we have to start talking differently about things which have become perfectly acceptable and normal in Ireland, then that's going to be a complex conversation, because people will react, I suspect, in a way which is, that's not part of the deal. So, I suppose I have a number of points. One is I think that really matters. Two, I think that the issue of dealing with that question still should be at the top of our priorities. And three, that at some level or other, it doesn't just affect the people who are living through it at the middle. It affects lots of people who don't know they're affected until the question gets asked. There are loads of people in England and all of these opinion polls telling us now they'd rather have Brexit than Northern Ireland. I do understand that. The only problem is, I would say, quite a lot of people in the Republic of Ireland might eventually prefer Brexit to Northern Ireland. But I'm being a bit facetious about a serious topic. What I'm actually saying is that in many ways, Northern Ireland has allowed the rest of Britain and the rest of Ireland to live as if this is a problem somewhere else. And it's no longer. It may no longer be true, because it's already affecting Brexit, and it will affect the rest of our relations as we go forward. Okay, very quickly. 2 minutes. Oh dear. 3.5. 2.5. Okay, so I suppose what I want to say in light of what Susan had to say, and a little bit in the light of what Katie had to say about the changes. There are no doubt that the Good Friday Agreement was a critical issue, but it's critical midwife. The only thing that made it possible, paradoxically, to get to normal, we had to have abnormal relationships between Britain and Ireland. Britain and Ireland had to set aside national egotism and say it's more important that we come to a deal together and work something together and we can be British, allow those people to be British, Irish or both. Let's at least defuse that bomb. I have to say that in that shadow, many things have, of course, changed. We've had far less violence. and I'm sure you'll hear as well that there's huge changes at generational level. Migration, religiosity has changed, the changes in the South, the changes in the global media, all of these things have massively changed. And at the same time, there are subliminal class issues. You can move from one part of Belfast where it is if you are living somewhere in Western Europe, and then you can move within a mile to live in another part where nothing seems to have changed, as in last week in Avonlea. So I suppose what I would say to you is this. I have Lyra McKee on one shoulder, and I have last week's Twitter on the other. I have 910 days of no government in Northern Ireland as the best available solution to rocking the boat. I want to suggest to you the reason we've come to still stand is because if anybody did anything, everybody would start to take offence. And therefore, we're currently in this complete windstill. So, to get there, I would like to say to you this. I think, first of all, if we are to change this, we're going to have to look at really rethinking this. We did a whole report on this, and I want to say that some of this requires individual initiative, people pushing it up there. I worked with Maura Quigley, and I have to say she has an old-fashioned civic sense of duty, and she simply put it into the middle. And I think we need more people from this room who know about the past to stand up in the middle and still say we are the centre that is going to be made or to hold. Second thing I think is that at some level or other we have to be really clear about what the consequences of trying to talk about division are. First of all, it cannot be entirely controlled by political party priorities. There has to be something which allows it to be a wider discussion than that. Whether that is in a civic voice, which brings it right sizes this issue, along with issues of gender, issues of ethnicity, issues of new coalitions, the stuff that Lyra McKee was talking about. But also age changes it, so that people are brought into the room who talk about this from a different space and connect it into other topics. There are loads of other things. Yep, I'm going now. There are loads of other things we should do. And this is my very last sentence, which is this. Which is that the centre will only hold if we prioritise, in fact, making sure that we start all the futures that we share with each other, that we trade with each other, are shared futures. That is different from being a single shared future. But it is a challenge to everybody who enters the public space to say that it is no longer good enough simply to say what you want. It is absolutely imperative for you to say, what do I want and what will its implications be for you? And if we trade politics like that, we might begin a different topic.